Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to my Hellstart set review. Inspired by Asmo's 8.0 set review, I decided I would have a little fun and give my thoughts on the playability of the various packs that we have created in Hellstart. Here's how it's going to work. Basically, I'm just going to go through and read every card and give you my opinion on how it plays and how good it is. This will not be my opinion on how well it's designed or how funny it is. I think all the cards are well designed and pretty funny. And then I will go over any notable synergies you should look out for while playing the packs, and then I'll give you my rating on how highly I would take this specific pack. So, without further ado, let's jump on into it and go to our first pack, which is Adventures. Alright, so the face card for the Adventures pack is, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this, I'm sorry, Dawn Quixote, which is for 3 mana, 1 white, gets you a legendary creature, Human Knight, with whenever a creature you control enters from exile, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Create a legendary creature token with those characteristics. The legendary cast of characters is Sancho, the 2/2 white knight with vigilance, Dulcinea, the 1/2 blue noble with hexproof, Pero, the 1/1 black cleric with lifelink, Nicholas, the 1/1 red barber with haste, Riconante, the 3/4 green horse with can't attack unless it was saddled this turn, saddle 2. And then it has a quest to remember. 1 and a white, another target creature you control goes on an adventure, exile it, and you may cast it later from exile. So something to note with this card is that the first ability here that creates the legendary cast of characters does not trigger on casting a creature from adventure, but because it's a adventures pack and it's the face card, I'm assuming it's meant to. So with that being said, I imagine this will be errated, and so we're going to evaluate this card based on the errata. So I think this card's pretty powerful. So it's a 3 mana 2/2 with no protection, but there's not a lot of removal in Jumpstart. So it will probably stick around for a turn or two, and it will protect your other creatures. I imagine the play pattern with this card is that you're going to play it, and then you're going to untap, and you're just going to hold up 2 mana for the rest of the game to protect one other creature from removal or block, and then activate the ability, because it is instant speed. The fact that it's going to pump out 5 different tokens is pretty good, especially some of these are pretty good. Sancho can saddle Ricanante, for example, and so that'll be 3/4, and that 3/4 can also block. I think this pack's actually going to be pretty slow, and it's going to be very grindy, getting you a lot of value as the game goes on, and getting that 3/4 that can block is going to be pretty good. So I think this face card's quite powerful. Up next is Shepherd of the Flock Side. It's 1 and a white for a creature, Human Peeblin Pirate. That's a 3/1 with when this creature enters, create X treasure tokens where X is 1 plus the number of sheep you control. There's no sheep in this pack, so that's just always going to be 1 treasure. And then it has Usher to the Dock, smiley face for single white, instant adventure. Return target permanent you control to its owner's hand, then exile this card, you may cast the creature later from exile. So, I think this card's pretty good. 2 mana for 3/1's fine. The fact that it makes a treasure is very powerful, especially because, for example, you can send this on an adventure with Dawn, the face card, and then recast it later, and just build up some treasure tokens to protect your other creatures. That's pretty good. And of course, the Usher to the Dock is going to be a not like game-breaking effect, but protecting your own creature or blocking and then picking something up or resetting an adventure is going to be pretty powerful, and allows you to slowly build up value as the game goes longer, which I think this pack is actually going to excel at. All right, and the next card is Keswick Scout Leader. For 1 and a white, you get a creature, Human Scout, 2/2. It says creature cards you own can go on Keswick Scout Leader's adventure. And Keswick Scout Leader's adventure is Recruiter Friend for 1 and a white. You get a sorcery adventure with create a 1 white human scout creature token. I think this card's incredibly powerful. So you are going to get a lot of 1/1s, and these 1/1s are going to be great blockers for a long time because, again, as I've stated a couple times now, you're going to want to be building up value as the game goes on. And creating these 1/1s is going to allow you to both, that is value that you're creating, and it's also going to allow you to survive longer to build up more value as the game goes on. So I think this card is incredibly powerful. I think it might be the best card in the entire pack. Up next, we have Childhood Dog. For 1 and a white, you get a creature dog that enters tapped. It's a 2/2, and if it would die, it goes on an adventure instead. But it has no actual adventure. So when it dies, it just gets exiled, and then you can cast it from exile at any time. Obviously, that you could cast a creature. So, this is going to trigger the face card, and other than that, it's just an unkillable 2/2. Now, it does enter tapped, so it takes 2 turn cycles to block, recast, untap, and then block again. But again, this is going to be another repeatable value engine for this slow and grindy pack, which I don't think it's incredibly powerful. It's nothing to write home about, but it is a good design, or not a good design, but a playable card. You will be happy to be casting this. All right, up next we have Sancho Panza, Loyal Squire. That's a 3-mana creature, 2 and a white for a legendary creature, Human Soldier. That's a 1/4. And it says, you may have Sancho follow your cards going into adventure. And when Sancho enters your attack, scry 1, then squire 1. Like scry, but you may cast knights or adventures as you squire them. So, to explain how this card works, so whenever you cast a card for its adventure half, and then that card goes into exile as it resolves, you may have Sancho go from the battlefield into the exile zone. I'm 99% sure because most of the time a card will reference that that, like, if it's in your hand, the ability will say from your hand. So 99% of the time, abilities that don't reference being in your hand or elsewhere only work on the battlefield. So I'm pretty sure this first ability only works on the battlefield. Even then, you're paying 2 and a white for a 1/4. That's a pretty good blocker. And when it enters your attacks, you scry 1, squire 1. Now, most of the time when you are casting it, you're just getting the scry 1, basically, which is pretty good, actually. That's not bad, especially in a lower power environment like Hellstart. But I will say, once you start attacking with this creature, basically every creature in the set, except for like the Childhood Dog, has an adventure that you can cast, or is a knight, which the face card is. And so this is pretty close to scry 1, then draw a card a third of the time, basically. Maybe even more, because you do get to scry 1 first to set up that ability. And that's incredibly powerful for a 3-drop. This card is going to give you a lot of advantage as the game goes on. I think pretty highly of it. All right, up next we have Food Alley Broker. For 2 and a white, you get a creature Human Citizen. That's a 3/2 with Order Up. For a white mana, instant adventure, create Bagel and Schmear, and whenever this creature attacks, you may cast a copy of its adventure. Bagel and Schmear being an artifact food with white tap sack, put a 1/1 counter on up to 1 target creature, draw a card, or 2 tap sack, gain 3 life and draw a card. So this is another repeatable form of card advantage, and it's going to gain you some lives to buffer your life total as the game goes on. So usually you're going to cast this early, create a Bagel and Schmear, cash that Bagel and Schmear in for a card, and then cast it later and start attacking with it to build up more Bagel and Schmears, which you will then cash in for life and cards, or buffing up the Food Alley Broker itself, actually, so that it can get in with more attacks, which I think is going to be pretty important. I think that this card is pretty strong if left unchecked. If it can't attack, it's not going to do a lot, but if you're able to buff it up to a 4/3 and then a 5/4 with it while it's attacking, and just creating this every time it attacks, it just buffs itself or something else and draws you another card, you're going to pull way ahead on advantage in this already pretty heavy advantage pack. Up next, we have Bespoke House Mouse, 2 and a white for a 2/1 with it doesn't have any creature types, so I'm assuming it's a mouse. But once per turn, if this is exiled, you may cast Squeak By from exile, then exile it again since it's an adventure, and it enters with a 1/1 counter on it for each Squeak By you've squoke this game. And Squeak By is a sorcery adventure for a single white mana with target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. It can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater this turn. So this sort of fits with the lots and lots of value of the rest of the pack, except that it really rewards attacking, which I actually don't think the rest of the pack really rewards. And so I think this card's pretty weak. It's 3 mana for a 2/1. Now it enters with a bunch of 1/1 counters on it if you cast Sweep By a bunch, but you're going to have a lot of modality on what cards you're going to cast, which side of every card you're going to cast in this pack. And so I don't know how much you're going to have 1 extra mana sitting around to cast Squeak By, especially when you're not going to be doing a ton of attacking this pack and you're going to want to be building up blockers to gain more advantage. So I think this card's one of the weaker ones in the pack, but obviously it is still infinite advantage. So which shows you, I think, what I think the strength of this pack is. Alright, up next we have the first removal spell, which is Bridge to Terabithia for 1 and a white. It's a sorcery. Target creature you control and target creature you don't control go on an adventure. Only yours can come back. And it's got some flavor text around it. I've never seen it, but I understand that this is a very sad joke. Alright, so this requires you to have a creature in play. But other than that, it's an unconditional 2 mana sorcery speed exile removal spell. I think that's pretty powerful, and it also resets your EDB creatures, of which there are a couple. So I think that's pretty cool. You're going to need a creature in play for this to work, but you will in this pack. So I rate this removal spell pretty highly. I think this removal spell is pretty powerful. Alright, up next we have Into the Binder It Goes. For a single white, you get a sorcery with target artifact or enchantment you don't control goes on an adventure. And Overload for 1 white, which of course makes it say each artifact or enchantment you don't control goes on an adventure. I don't think there's many artifacts or enchantments in Hellstart, and so I don't think this card is particularly powerful just because of how narrow it is. When it comes up, it's going to be pretty good, resetting artifacts and enchantments, but of course your opponent can just recast them. So I don't think this card is particularly powerful. Usually I would pay 1 mana to destroy an artifact or an enchantment up, with some sort of downside like Nature's Game. They gain 4 life, or Natural State it has to be mana value 3 or less, but in white you could often spend 2 mana and feel pretty unhappy about removing an artifact or enchantment. So the fact that you don't even get to permanently remove a pretty uncommon card type means that I think this card's going to be pretty weak. I do like Jim Davis staring at me here though, so that's pretty funny. Alright, up next we've got Ronginante, the spaceship, not the horse. For 1 and white, you get a legendary artifact spacecraft with station, and you may tap creature cards you own on adventures to station Ricuante. You can't cast tapped cards. With 7+ counters on it, it gains when you cast a spell from exile, draw a card. This ability only triggers once each turn, and 15+ counters. It has flying and first strike. It is a 4/4 creature. So I think this card's incredibly powerful. So a lot of the spacecraft station cards from Edge of Eternities were pretty underwhelming, and a lot of that was because you just had to spend a lot of time and effort stationing up your spacecraft, and it just straight up isn't worth it when you could be using those creatures to do the things the creatures are designed to do. Unlike vehicles, you would cast a summoning sick creature, tap it once to get the vehicle in there. Unlike that, the spacecraft required a significantly higher investment, needing a lot of counters. That being said, because you can tap creature cards you own on adventure, you can cast the adventure and immediately tap the card, and you don't get the downside of not being able to cast it because you've already spent your mana this turn. And once you get to 7+, this turns into a sort of Edgewall Innkeeper type effect. And that card was insane in Standard, and I think it's going to be pretty powerful in this limited environment. You will eventually get to 15 plus, and at that point you'll have a 4/4 flying first strike. But in the meantime, you can have a repeatable card advantage engine that is pretty hard to remove in Hellstart. So I like this card a lot. I think it's incredibly powerful and fits with the really slow building up advantage theme that this pack has. All right, and the final card in the pack is, forgive me, I don't know the reference. It's Olenta Zero Real for 4 white, so 6 mana. You get a legendary creature giant, 6/6. With when it enters or attacks, you may donate a permanent to target opponent. If you do, target non-land permanent goes on an adventure. And it has a adventure Basque X-Max for X and a white. It's a sorcery adventure. Create X charcoal diamonds with 24 stun counters. Charcoal diamond being 2 for an artifact with charcoal diamond enters the battlefield tapped and tapped to add a black. So basically textless permanents that you can donate. I think this card's pretty weak. Sending non-land permanents on an adventure on enter or attack is interesting, but you have to dump a bunch of mana into a nothing burger adventure to get that effect. And I think a 6 mana 6/6 will be pretty powerful on the board, but I mean, how often are you even going to get to 6 mana in a Hellstart? That's a good question. Kind of depends on the other packs you draft or other pack you draft, but I'm not super enthused about this card. It will probably win you some games as a finisher, but it's not incredibly powerful, especially because you have to put a lot of time and effort into getting a pretty lackluster effect. All right. Oh, and of course, there's the non-basic land, Forgotten Realms, which taps to add a colorless, or you can pay 1 and tap to add 1 mana of any color, or you can tap it to return it to its owner's hand. And then it has the adventure Adventures for a single colorless instant venture into the dungeon. And you can then play the land from exile. I think this is another powerful, slow card advantage engine. I think you're going to want to start looping this after the game stalls out, which you're hoping to do in this pack anyway, and repeatedly venture into the dungeon, which the dungeon effects are medium at best, but they start turning into about a card worth of quality once you get a few rooms into all the dungeons. And at that point, that's pretty powerful for land, and you can do this basically once per turn cycle, so that's pretty good. That's a lot of value over the game, especially on, again, what is just a land that you can just play to cast your spells early game, and then it picks itself up and starts granting you advantage. I think this card's going to be very, very good in this pack as well. All right, I just wanted to point out one notable synergy, which is, of course, between Kessig Scout Leader and Sancho Panza Loyal Squire, in that while Kessig Scout Leader's on the battlefield, Squiring 1 will allow you to cast Recruit a Friend with any card from the top of your library, since or any creature card, because every creature card can go on Recruit a Friend's adventure, so you can just cast Recruit a Friend from whatever creature card you look at when you're scoring 1. So that's a pretty cool and powerful synergy to look out for. All right, overall, I would give this pack an A+. I think adventures are very powerful on their own, as they're basically 2 cards in 1, and basically every single card in the entire pack is 2 cards in 1, and that is strong. In addition, there's ways to gain infinite value with a lot of cards in the pack, as long as you're able to slow the game down, and the pack also supports doing that a lot. I think that you are going to really want to highly pick this pack if you see it, especially if it's the first pack, or if you are in one monocolor or in half white. I think that this pack is incredibly powerful, and that's basically all I have to say about that, so let's move on to the next pack. Alright, and our next pack is going to be Lockdown in Space. The face card for Lockdown in Space is Grand Strategy Space Simulation Game from the early 2000s, which is an enchantment for 2 white with when this enchantment enters, split the battlefield such that each player's permanents reside in that player's own sector. Newly played permanents enter within their controller's home space, obviously. Warp Gate Star Lane Drive. Creatures may tap as a sorcery to jump to any other sector. And creatures may only attack players whose sector they are in, and only can block attacking creatures if they're in the same sector. Okay, so this card's very strange, and let's go over exactly how it plays before we start reviewing it. So, the way this works is when it enters, it permanently splits the battlefield into two, such that each player's permanents are in their own sector, and their permanents that they play enter within their controller's home space. Non-played permanents that enter, such as created tokens, I imagine, also enter into their controller's home space, although it's not stated. Now, if it leaves the battlefield, it has some other rules text that goes away, and so even though the battlefield is split into two sectors, that doesn't matter because no rules define those sectors. Now, I think this first ability fails if you play the second one, because there are two copies of this face card. I'm pretty sure that we won't have 4 sectors on the battlefield, but I could be wrong about that. I think we'd have to ask a judge. Now, creatures may tap as a sorcery to jump to any other sector, and creatures may only attack players whose sector they are in, and can only block attacking creatures if they're in the same sector. So this basically means that in order to attack your opponent, you have to tap your creature on one turn, and then attack them on the next turn. And in order to block those attacking creatures, you have to make sure that you haven't tapped them to send them over to your opponent's side of the board. Since this is a lockdown pack, you're basically never going to be attacking your opponent until you're ready to win the game, and so you're going to keep all your creatures on your side of the board and force your opponent to tap all their creatures to send them over to your side of the board, and then you can point removal spells at them. I think this is actually a pretty effective strategy if you manage to get this card out. And basically just has your opponent's creatures basically be super summoning sick. And I think that's reasonably powerful. It's not insane. It's not, moat. It's not any of these other powerful white enchantments that stop creatures from attacking or turn them into abilityless 1/1s or whatever. But it is powerful enough that you will play it if it's in your hand and you're doing the lockdown strategy. Alright, the next card is Bone. For no mana, so you can't cast it. It's a creature, 2/1. And it has plot for a white and first strike, so you can pay 1 white mana to exile it and then cast it for free on a later turn. And it's a first strike with 2/1. First strike is an incredibly powerful defensive ability. Unfortunately, this card can't be cast if you draw it later in the game. And so it's just a 1-drop that is a first striking 2/1 blocker the next turn, which is pretty good, but it's not insane. And it doesn't have a lot of cohesion with the rest of the pack, so it's alright. I mean, you'll play it when you draw it, but it's not anything crazy. Alright, up next we have Banisher Sentinel, 1 and a white for a 2/2 artifact creature human soldier with when Banisher Sentinel enters, target creature an opponent controls is on its best behavior until this creature leaves the battlefield. It can't attack, block, or activate abilities without asking permission for that action. Permission may be obtained if a bribe of 3 mana is paid or if you choose to allow it. Which means that basically target creature can't attack or block or activate its abilities unless its controller pays 3, which is a lot. That's pretty powerful for a 2-mana 2/2, but it's not going to lock down a creature forever. If the board stalls out, then that creature is going to start being able to do stuff again, because your opponent will just have a bunch of lands sitting around. If the board doesn't stall out and you end the game quickly, this card's pretty powerful, but the rest of the pack doesn't really work with that. So, I mean, this is a 2-mana 2/2 removal spell. That's pretty good if you are attacking. So, if you pick a more aggressive second pack, then I think this card's going to be pretty good. If you're playing 2 defensive packs, I think this card's going to be shockingly weak for how powerful it looks at a first glance. Up next, we have Rip Van Winkle, which is a 1 and a white for a legendary creature human elder, 10/10, with Rip Van Winkle is phased out unless it is your turn 10 or later and has trample and ward 10. I think this card is going to be your finisher. So this is going to be the reason you're going to be locking down in space in order to build up slowly towards getting to your turn 10 and then just winning the game with Rip Van Winkle. I think that when you draw this card, you're going to win a lot of those games, and when you don't draw this card, this pack's going to feel pretty weak and disjointed. That being said, you will also lose some games before this creature ever phases in, and you feel like you've drawn a blank card. Overall, I think this card is the reason to play the pack and pretty powerful. So the number of non-games it will produce is probably less than the number of games it wins you. Alright, up next we have Thalia is done with this shit. 1/1 white for a 2/1 legendary creature human rogue with first strike annihilate Eldrazi 1, and whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, destroy one of the lands used to cast it. So there's not a ton of non-creature spells in Jumpstart, but there are a fair amount in the packs, and so this is going to destroy several lands, including some of your own, which is interesting for a go-along strategy, especially with the Banisher, because your opponent might not have a bunch of lands sitting around to pay 3 mana to get permission to do things if they're casting non-creature spells and Thalia's blowing up their lands. So I think that's interesting. Overall, I think this card's pretty powerful. Again, 2/1 first strike body's pretty good. Annihilate Eldrazi will basically never come up, and destroying lands is always powerful, but I don't know how much this card's going to affect the board, so I think it's about medium power level. Up next, we have the first of one of my cards. So this is One Night Stand, 1 and a white for an instant, with target creature goes to your mom's bed. Check out the rules for your mom's bed on the back. If you own it gains flash, and you may cast it without paying its mana cost until end of turn. And your mom's bed is a public shared zone that's also unordered. Players can cast creature cards they own in this zone, and creatures cast this way are off-springed, which means that when they enter, you create a 1/1 token copy of them. This is a blink spell. There's a couple ETB creatures. There's at least one in this pack, but other than that, you're just going to be saving one of your creatures in combat and then getting a 1/1 copy of it, which is pretty efficient for 2 mana. Occasionally, you will exile one of your opponent's creatures, or not exile, but send it to your mom's bed, which is basically exile, just to push in for lethal damage. But other than that, you will almost never target your opponent's creatures because they're going to get value when they offspring those creatures later. So I think this card's pretty powerful, especially if you have ETB effects. I don't love that it doesn't synergize with the pack a ton, but that's my fault for submitting it. Up next, we have Her Majesty's Astral Warden, 1 white for a creature, Cyclops Cop's Spirit, 2/4 with Flying Vigilance and Ward 1, and has white tap, warp this creature into another target creature, so exile them at the beginning of the next end step, then their owners may cast them from exile on a later turn, which is not exactly how I would expect warp to work. So again, those cards are exiled at the beginning of the next end step, so you're not warping them right now. You're acting as if you cast them for their warp cost this turn. Flying Vigilance Ward 1 on a 2/4 for 3 mana is pretty good, and the fact that in a pinch you can remove a creature for a little bit is pretty good, especially if you're building towards a Rip Van Winkle. I think this card's going to keep you alive for longer. I think this card's pretty powerful, and you'd be pretty happy to draw and cast it. Up next, we got Space Out, 1 and a white for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature is in space. It can't attack or target anything on Earth, and it can only block creatures with more than 1 instance of flying. So basically, it can't attack or block or target anything. It will still have abilities, so other than being unable to target things, it is just a pacifism, which I think is pretty weak. I mean, it's a good removal spell for limited, so you'll probably cast it, and you'll probably be pretty good, but there'll be situations in which your opponent has an annoying ability on a creature, and you'll be mad that your Space Out does not answer it. So it's a little below average of the average removal spell. Up next, we have the Chimp. They call me the Chimp. I cost 1 and a white, and I have a base power and toughness of 2/2. As I enter, you may choose a creature name, like Mario. Then I give them a rock mushroom for my bowling challenge. While I'm around, creatures with that name have trample and lose all other abilities. Wicked. So this is another 2 mana 2/2 that when it enters, basically locks down a creature. And I think this one's weaker than the Banisher because if your opponent has a big creature in play, giving it trample and removing its other abilities is not going to stop you from dying, which is what you want to do to get around to your Rip Van Winkle. That being said, I mean, 2 mana for a 2/2 that also wipes out all the abilities on an opponent's creature can be pretty powerful, so I think this card's above rate, and you'll be happy to play it most of the time. There are going to be some instances where it doesn't do a lot, and that kind of sucks. Up next, we have your OTB is now a subscription, 1 and a white for an enchantment aura with enchant creature. Enchanted creature has cumulative upkeep. Pay this creature's mana cost. And I think everything else on this card is flavor text. So this card is a slow removal spell. So you're going to put it on an opponent's creature. They're going to untap. They're going to decide whether or not they want to pay the mana cost. If they do, they get to keep the creature around for 1 more turn. After that, it's going to double, and after that, it's going to triple, and they're not going to want to pay that anymore. That being said, 1 and a white for destroying an opponent's creature in 2 turns is not great, not powerful particularly, so I think this card's pretty weak, but it is a removal spell, so you can cast it on a creature that your opponent has sent over to your sector if you get the face card from this pack into play, which I think will give it some utility. Next up, we have the Wandering Kills Stealer. It's 2 white for a legendary planeswalker with flash, and if a creature would die, it becomes a loyalty counter on the Wandering Kills Stealer instead. When you remove loyalty, pick which to remove. Removed cards go to their owner's graveyard. And for 0, it has until end of turn. The Wandering Kill Stealer becomes a 4/4 samurai creature with all of the abilities of each of her loyalty counters. And -3, destroy target tapped creature. So even though this has flash, you cannot activate its abilities at instant speed, unlike the Wandering Emperor. So you're going to cast this in your opponent's untap. End step, you're going to untap, and you're going to kill one of the creatures they attacked with or moved over to your sector. And after that, you're just going to turn it into a 4/4 samurai creature because it's going to be pretty hard. I guess it will immediately go back up to 3 loyalty counters. So this kind of acts like a double removal spell if you can protect it. And other than that, I mean, a 4/4 for 4 with the other creature's abilities is going to be pretty good. I think this card's pretty powerful. Most planeswalkers are, and I don't think this one's an exception. Finally, we have the land, Innistrاد's Bright Ass Moon, which is a kindred land Eldrazi. With this land enters tapped unless you control a creature with mana value 7 or greater, so it always enters tapped, and taps to add a white. And then it has, is that a tentacle for 2 and a white? Instant omen, shuffle target attacking creature into your library. Also shuffle this card. So, I mean, this card's pretty similar to Aganjo, the channel land from Neo. I think this card's pretty good. Obviously, a tap land sucks, but having it be a split card with a removal spell is pretty powerful, and the fact that you can remove even large attacking creatures is pretty cool. That creature does go into your library, so you might dead draw a card that is not in your colors, which kind of sucks. But you can also redraw this, which is interesting. And of course, it's always a land, so I think this card's pretty good. I think this card's above average, honestly. All right, let's talk about notable combos in this pack. There aren't a ton. This pack feels a little disjointed to me, but the combo I'd like to point out is Rip Van Winkle plus keeping track of what turn it is from the start of the game, because it will be on you to keep track of that, and otherwise, I imagine the judge will rule it's just phased out forever if you can't prove it's turn 10 or later, so keep track of that, because this card is going to be the one that's winning you the game. So, just a big warning there. And then finally, the overall grade for this pack, C-. Listen, I don't really think that there's a lot of synergy within the pack, and a lot of the cards are a little underwhelming and or situational. I kept pointing out the situations in which cards would be bad, which is not great when every single card has a situation where it's going to be bad, because it's going to come up. There's only really one card in your entire 40-card deck that you're excited to be slowing down the game to get to. Other than that, you're just slowing down the game for no reason. That being said, this is also a pile of removal spells, so if you have an aggressive secondary pack, this might be a good pick to pick up to complement that aggressive pack and just start removing creatures. All right, our next pack is the Garfield pack. So the face card for this pack is Garfield Mystic. For 1 and a white, you get a 2/2 creature cat cleric with spells you cast that can create tokens, cost 1 less to cast, and whenever a food you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on Garfield Mystic. Alright, so this card seems pretty powerful. It both reduces the cost of spells you cast, and it grows over time as you sacrifice foods. I think this card would be pretty powerful if the rest of the pack synergized with it. Unfortunately, I don't think the pack synergizes with it a ton, and so I think this card's going to be pretty close to a grizzly bear a lot of the time, which is unfortunate. That being said, if you are cost reducing a couple of spells with this, it's going to be more powerful. Alright, next up we have Get Those Big Ass Ears out of the card name Goddamn. For white, you get a creature cat 2/2 with Shroud. So there are some cat typal synergies in this pack, and so having a cat creature with Shroud can be useful for those synergies. Of course, you can't target it with things that say target cat because it does have Shroud, but a 2-mana 2/2 with Shroud is not bad. Up next we have Odie. Odie is a legendary creature innocent dog for a white. It's a 3/1 with kicker 0 and flesh. And when Odie enters, if he was kicked, fling him. So 99% of the time you're going to fling him by paying the kicker 0 cost, because white for 3 damage to any target at instant speed is pretty powerful. This doesn't synergize with anything in the pack, but this is basically lightning bolt for white, which you are going to play, especially unlimited. And the fact that you can get a 3/1 for 2 mana with flash, if you don't have anything to lightning bolt, it gives this card increased flexibility. So I think this card's quite powerful. Alright, next we have Jim Davis's command and Jim Davis's command, which are both instants that create 2/1/1 creature tokens. Now, if it's not a Monday, you are going to get a cat creature, which is helpful for the typal synergies in the pack, but otherwise the types on the cards don't matter. I mean, this is just 2/1/1 bodies for 2 mana instant speed. That's reasonably powerful. I think that you'll be happy to cast this, although it's not anything insane or broken. Alright, up next we have just a normal cat. So for 2 and a white, you get a creature cat. That's a 17/17 with Devoid. And cumulative upkeep, remove a -1/-1 counter from just a normal cat. And just a normal cat enters with 16 -1/-1 counters on it. So you're going to cast this as a 1/1, and then when you untap, it'll turn into a 2/2, which you've now paid 3 mana for a 2/2, so you probably won't attack with that. But then the next turn you'll have a 4/4, and you can, so 3 mana for a 4/4 is pretty good, and then the next turn you'll have an 8/8, and then the next turn you will have a 16/16, and those are incredibly powerful. So I think that this card is quite strong, and you'll be pretty happy to cast this, especially early. If the board's not super developed, then spend the next turn or two worrying about other permanents on the board, and then all of a sudden you're just attacking with a massive creature. So I think this card's pretty strong. Up next we have, I hired this Iono to stare at the Garfield show for 2 and a white. It's a sorcery with put a Garfield show counter on a cat you control. Create a 3/3 legendary pink and cyan gym leader creature token named Iono with whenever Iono watches Garfield show, one of Garfield's abilities is triggered or activated for the first time in a turn. Put a +1/+1 counter on Iono and create a treasure token. So there's a bunch of cats in this set. For example, the previously mentioned just a normal, what was it called? Just a normal cat. I think this counts even though the cat is in quotation marks. You'd have to ask a judge. But anyway, there's a bunch of cats in this pack, but if you don't draw one, this card's going to be it's going to be all right because you don't actually need to target a cat. So it's just a 3-mana 3/3. Now, if you do have a cat with triggered abilities, then this card is going to be pretty strong because it's going to grow over time and give you treasure tokens, which is pretty good. If you don't control a cat when you cast it, you're probably just going to cast it to get a 3/3 in play, and it's going to be pretty mid. But, it's limited, so 3 mana for a 3/3 isn't the end of the world. So I think this card has a pretty high ceiling and a pretty medium-low floor. Up next, we have Mayonnaise Elemental. For 1 and a white, you get a 2/2 with whenever a player does something a card says they may do, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. This ability only triggers once each turn. Whenever you sacrifice a food, you may draw a card. And 2 taps, sacrifice this creature. You gain 3 life, activate only as a sorcery. Okay, so this card doesn't really synergize with a ton of cards in the pack. Some cards make food tokens, but basically nothing says they may do it. Now, this card synergizes with itself in that it says you may do something. So if you're sacrificing foods, then you are both growing this and drawing cards, so that's pretty powerful. The fact that you can turn food into clue tokens, basically, is pretty strong. And I think that you will find that this card is the biggest card advantage engine in the pack, and that it'll be the most powerful, and you'll win a lot of games when you are sacrificing foods with it in play. So I think this card's probably the best card in the pack, but it's not super exciting either. Up next, we have Why Do They Call It Oven When You of in the cold food, of out hot, eat the food. For white, you get an instant with target creature has a fucking stroke and dies. You and its controller both make a food token. So this is a food token synergy card for all the food token cards, such as Garfield Mystic and the Mayonnaise Elemental. And it's a unconditional removal spell for 2 mana. I think this card's incredibly powerful. You don't mind that you're giving your opponent a food token when you're the one that has all the food token synergies. So I think this is like a very strong removal spell. Up next, we have Garfield, Are You /serious or /joking? For 1 and a white. It's a sorcery with choose 1. Destroy target creature with mana value 3 or less. That creature's controller creates an artifact token named Decoy, or return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So I think this card's pretty good. It's a removal spell. Target creature with mana value 3 or less is going to be most of the cards in Jumpstart, so this is a almost unconditional removal spell. I mean, there's probably going to be about 1 card from each pack that this doesn't destroy, but other than that, you're going to be able to destroy basically everything. And it also creates a token, so it does get reduced in cost by Garfield Mystic, so that's pretty good. And of course, it also has flexibility to return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield if there's nothing you want to remove, so that bumps it up even more. I think this card is quite powerful. Up next, we have Dreams of Lasagna. For 1 and a white, you get an instant with create a food token, draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on up to 1 target cat. So again, this cannot target. Get your big ass ears out of the frame, goddamn. And it has flashback for 3 and a white. So, I mean, this card's pretty good if you have Garfield Mystic in play because it costs only 1 mana and creates that food token to grow the Garfield Mystic. This card, I think, synergizes the most with Garfield Mystic in the entire pack, and I think it's going to be pretty good if you have both of them together. This card's, other than that, it's all right. It's kind of a slow card for 2 mana. You get a food token, which you would have to pay 2 more mana to gain 3 life, and then it draws you a card, so it cycles, and then it grows the cat if you have one, but not by a ton, and then it flashbacks for 4, which is again pretty slow. But if you have Garfield Mystic in play, this card gets a lot better. Alright, up next we have Yeah, I Want to Vape. For 2 white, you get a sorcery with turn all creatures into food tokens. They bounce when eaten. So, I mean, this is worse than Wrath of God in your creature-heavy pack. This will turn your opponent's board and your board into a bunch of food tokens, which each player will slowly crack to gain life and bounce those creatures back into their hand. And the board state and game will stall out, and then everyone will slowly redevelop their board. And it will be like you didn't cast this, except everyone's at a higher life total, which isn't great, and it resets ETBs. I think this card's pretty weak. You're going to cast it when you're behind on board, but it won't actually give you any advantage like Wrath of God usually does when you wrath multiple creatures, because your opponent's going to be able to crack those food tokens and bounce them to their hand. And again, because you spent 4 mana on this sorcery, your opponent's going to get their first crack at eating those food tokens to pick up their creatures and recast them. I think this card's pretty weak. I would not be excited to cast it. Of course, you will if it's in your hand and you're behind on board, but it's not particularly powerful in my opinion. And for our land, we have Cascadia, which is a legendary land that taps to add a white, and for 2 and a white and tap, the next spell you cast this turn has Cascade. When you cast it, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a cat card that costs less. You may cast it without paying its mana cost. Put the exile cards in the bottom in a random order. So, I mean, this is just an unconditional untapped white land, and of course, it having Cascade will almost never come up because you have to spend 4 mana, 3 other lands, this land, and then also the entirety of the spell you cast to even have the ability happen. And I believe the cheapest cat in the pack is 2 mana, so you'd have to spend at least a 3 mana card to give it Cascade and get any value whatsoever, which means that you would have to spend a total of 7 mana to get any advantage out of this land, which means it will almost never come up, especially in Hellstart. But if the game stalls out, it might. And of course, it's an unconditional untapped land. So this is, I mean, there's no downside. So you can basically evaluate this as like planes with marginal upside. So that's pretty good. All right. One notable synergy to point out is that Mayonnaise Elemental and Yeah, I Want to Vape is a pretty good combo because you are sacrificing the foods, even though they bounce when they're eaten, because getting eaten means that you did sacrifice them. So you can draw several cards. You can cast Yeah, I Want to Vape, and then the first food you can eat is the Mayonnaise Elemental, and you can pick that up and then recast it, and then all the other foods you eat is going to draw you a bunch of extra cards, and you're going to be gaining life, and your opponent's going to have to spend time resetting their board as well, meaning that you'll have time to gain life and draw a bunch of cards, so that's going to be a bunch of value if you get these 2 cards together. Alright. Overall, I'm going to give this pack a D because I feel like there's very little synergy. There's not a ton of cards that create tokens, and there's not a ton of cards that deal with food. There's some minor cat-typal synergies, but unfortunately, there's not enough to really tie the whole pack together. And there's a bunch of cards that are Garfield-themed, but don't actually do what Garfield Mystic wants you to do. And even some token-producing cards don't even get reduced by Garfield Mystic. So I would not take this pack particularly highly, but if you want to play with fun Garfield cards, I would not begrudge you from using this pack. Okay, next up we have Steven, which is the Go Wide or Anthem Affect Your Board strategy. And the face card here is Steven. For 1 and a white, you get a 1/1 creature, human with Steven Link. And of course, Steven Link is an ability from Earl of Squirrel, which had Squirrel Link, which made 1/1 squirrels equal to the amount of damage it dealt. So this is going to create Stevens equal to the number of damage it dealt, which means that if you block with this creature, it's probably going to die because it's only a 1/1, but you're going to get another Steven back. If you attack with this creature, it's probably going to die because it's a 1/1, but you're going to get another Steven back. And of course, if you start to pump it, then it's going to get out of hand pretty quickly. I think this card's quite powerful. It's basically impossible to remove in combat, and if you start pumping it, then it's going to get out of hand pretty quickly. And if your opponent doesn't have blockers, then it's going to turn into a bit of a Ragavan situation where your board's going to grow exponentially as time goes on. So I think this card has a very high floor and a very high ceiling. So I think this card's pretty powerful. All right, up next, we have Melvin. For 1 white mana, you get a 1/1 with Epic Lore, Instant Adventure. For 1 and a white, target creature gets +1/+1 and gains Melvin Link until end of turn. So this is not nearly as powerful as Stephen Link because, of course, Melvin does not have Melvin Link himself, which means that you can pump a creature and it at least get 2 1/1s when it deals combat damage this turn, which is quite powerful. But the 1 mana 1/1 is pretty weak. But the Epic Lore is pretty good, so you do want to be pumping your creatures in this pack. So if you pump Steven with Epic Lore, then you're getting 2 1/1 Stevens and 2 1/1 Melvins, which is pretty powerful. So I think this card's pretty good, and it's going to be part of your go wide strategy. Up next, we have Segovian Acroma. For white and a white, you get a 1/1 legendary creature angel with flying first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, protection from black, and protection from red. I think this card's pretty good, even if you don't pump it. First strike's an incredibly powerful ability, as well as vigilance, meaning that you can get into attack with flying and haste every single turn. And then you can also leave it back to block any 1 toughness creatures and just eat them up. And then, of course, if you pump it, then you can start blocking even more creatures and getting in for more damage. I think this card's incredibly powerful, and you're going to be pretty happy to draw this one. Up next, we have Donkey Kong Ming, Sleeping Dragon. For white, you get a 2/2 legendary creature, Legend Monkey. All your other creatures get +1/+1 as long as Kong Ming is in play. I think 2 mana Lord effects is pretty powerful, and this is one of them, and so I think that you're going to be pretty happy to play this card. Now, of course, it's a creature, so it's vulnerable to removal, but while it's in play, the rest of your board's going to be bigger, and your opponent's going to have trouble dealing with all your various Stevens and Melvins that are now 2/2s instead of 1/1s. And because you have a bunch of 1/1s in this pack, it is basically going to be doubling the size of your board a lot of the time, which is pretty powerful. I think this card's pretty strong individually and in the pack. Alright, up next we have Brad. For 2 and a white, you get a 3/1 creature human with when Brad attacks while brattled, create Brad. And it has Brattle 2, which is just Saddle 2. So if you can tap your Donkey Kong Ming, which you don't want to attack or block with anyway, then you can Brattle Brad, and then you can create multiple Brads. And of course, it has a very similar situation to Steven, where when you can attack and it can get blocked, and because you created another one, it means that you basically can just chump attack all day long with this, which is pretty cool. But of course, you do need to brattle it, so I think this card's a lot weaker than Steven. But that being said, I think you'll be happy to draw this, especially if you have a couple extra creatures around that you can use to saddle. If you can't, I mean, a 3 mana 3/1's pretty weak, so pretty low floor, but I think you'll be happy to draw this card most of the time. Next, we have Matt Selesnya, inventor of Selesnya. For white-green hybrid, you get a 1/1 legendary creature elf with when Matt enters, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token, then put a +1 counter on target creature, and then you can exile it to have the next spell you cast this turn have Convoke. And there's not a lot of high mana value cards in this pack, or even in Hellstart in general, so that second ability is probably not going to come out very often. You're probably just going to want the 1/1 most of the time, but the fact that this is 2 mana for 3 power across 2 bodies is pretty good, and the fact that it can pump up your Stevens or whatever else is also pretty powerful, so I think this card's pretty good, and you're going to be pretty happy to play it. I don't think you're ever going to use that second ability, but that's alright. Up next, we have Pink Floyd the Wall. It's for 2 and a white, you get a 0/0 legendary artifact creature wall that's pink with Defender, and it can block any number of creatures. Each creature is another brick in the wall. The wall gets +0/+1 for each brick in it, and exile target creature from the graveyard. It becomes a brick on the wall. I think this card's incredibly powerful. It basically means that it's going to be turning off multiple of your opponent's creatures attacking every single turn. Because in addition to your board state and your opponent's board state, you can also exile creatures from a graveyard in a Scavenging Ooze type way to give it +0/+1. And it's going to grow out of hand pretty quickly. Scavenger Ooze is incredibly powerful. Of course, this can't attack, but it will become a very large blocker that can block any number of creatures, and your opponent's going to really struggle to get through the wall. So I think this card's quite powerful. It's not quite what the rest of the pack is doing synergy-wise, but I think you'll be happy to play it. Up next, we have Guard Thraben. For 1 and a white, you get an instant with counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1, create Thalia. So Thalia is a 2/1 legendary creature with first strike that makes... it's not the Guardian of Thraben. It's just a 2/1 legendary human soldier with first strike. So I think this card's going to be pretty good if you manage to do the mana type thing where you actually catch your opponent tapping out for a spell. And if you draw this late game, then this is just going to be a 2/1 with flash that you have to respond to your opponent's spell with. There's also not a ton of non-creature spells in Jumpstart. I think there's about 3 or 4 per pack. And so you're going to have to really keep an eye out for when this can be useful. So I think this card's pretty narrow, but when you get it off, it's incredibly powerful. So when you don't get it off, it's going to feel pretty weak and unimportant. So a lot of high variance on this card. Also doesn't super synergize with the rest of the pack a ton. All right, up next we have My Birthday. For 1 white, you get a legendary enchantment aura with enchant creature, and enchanted creature has pacify target creature. Pacified creatures can attack or block and give +1/+1 to enchanted creature, and creatures remain pacified as long as this card is in play, by the way. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you sacrifice My Birthday unless you pay X, where X is the amount of pacified creatures. So this card has the aura problem of when you target a creature, your opponent can just remove the creature, and then you've gotten yourself due for 1. That being said, if this sticks and then you can tap and start pacifying creatures, again, still weaker than pacifism the first time because it costs 1 more mana, and you have to tap a creature you control. But if you get it on off for 2 turns in a row, at that point it starts looking more and more powerful, where you can turn off multiple creatures and you only have to pay 2 or 3 mana in your upkeep, and then you're attacking with a creature that gets +3/+3. But again, that's pretty slow, so I think this card's pretty weak overall, but if your opponent doesn't interact at all and you get into Magical Christmas Land, I think this card can become more powerful. And of course, your opponents will run out of removal spells eventually, so if you're just slamming powerful threat into powerful threat, such as My Birthday, eventually one of them will stick. And so hopefully, if you can save this until you feel like your opponent's out of removal spells, then I think this card will snowball and win you the game. And so yeah, so generally pretty weak, but if you draw it late and your opponent's out of removal spells, this card becomes more and more powerful. All right, up next we have Gideon, a statue. For 1 and a white. It's a legendary artifact planeswalker Gideon with 6 loyalty counters, and creatures you control get +1/+1. So this is the second 2-mana Anthem effect in the pack, and 2-mana Anthem effects are good, especially in this pack. Not a ton to say here. You will have 1/1 creatures that you can use to block and protect Gideon, and so I think that's pretty good. I think this card's quite powerful, and 6 loyalty is a lot. Alright, up next we have +2 mace. For 1 and a white. You get an artifact equipment with equip 2, and equipped creature gets +2. Increase all numbers other than number words or costs on it by 2. I think this card's pretty powerful. Most of the time it's just going to be the normal +2 mace where the creature gets +2 power and +2 toughness, but there's a couple other synergies in the pack as well. I think this card's pretty good, especially with Steven. And then, of course, we have the land, which is school, and it's a land building with school enters tapped, tap to add white, and tap to learn, which is, of course, discard a card and draw a card because you will not have any lessons in your sideboard. So this is a tapped white source. You're going to have plenty of untapped mana in your deck, so you won't mind weaving in a tapped land somewhere along the way. And when you do, you're going to get a late game card filtering engine. So I think this card's pretty good. You're going to be pretty happy that it's in your deck, but you're not going to be blown away by it. Alright, one notable synergy to look out for is Donkey Kong Ming ++2 Mace, which will now give your board +3/+3, which is just an incredibly powerful anthem effect. So, if you manage to combine these two creatures, you're probably going to run away with the game after that. Overall, I give this pack a B+. I think there's a lot of really powerful cards and synergies in this pack, and it's pretty focused and condensed. That being said, you're playing with a lot of low power creatures, so if your opponent plays bigger creatures, you are going to run into some problems, but I think that a majority of the time you're going to get a ton of advantage and you're going to get a large board pretty quickly with this pack, and so I'm giving it a B+. And our last pack for white is Vehicles. The face card for Vehicles is one of my cards, Dominic Toretto. For 1 and a white, you get a legendary creature, Human Racist, that's a 1/2. And Dom can crew vehicles as though his power was infinity. And then you can pay a red or white hybrid and sacrifice a vehicle that Dom crewed this turn. Another target creature you control gains protection from everything until end of turn. So this creature is a 2-mana creature that's going to crew any vehicle you have, no matter what. And of course it has a secondary ability, but oftentimes you're not going to want to be sacrificing your vehicles to protect your creatures, because the vehicles are going to be the power cards of the pack. Of course, if you have another pack with other powerful creatures, you might use this ability, but oftentimes I expect that you will just be crewing one powerful vehicle per turn with Dominic, and I think that's pretty good. It's not anything to write home about, but I think it's pretty good. Next we have Black Lotus. For 0 mana, you get a 3/3 with haste and crew 1. So, if you have any creature on the board when you draw this, you can now tap that creature and attack with a 3/3 immediately for no mana. That's pretty good, but of course you do have to have a creature in play. I think this is a powerful vehicle, but of course vehicles have the downside of requiring another creature in play to work. Next we have 2025 Volvo V90 Cross Country Self-Driving Car. For 1 and a white, you get an Artifact Planeswalker vehicle with 3 loyalty counters. That's also a 4/4. It has haste. As long as this artifact is a creature, it's not a planeswalker. Crew 3. +1. Target vehicle gets crewed until end of turn. And -5. You get an emblem with vehicles you control or always crewed. So this is a 2-mana 4/4 with haste that can also buff up your other vehicles, and it can be attacked, but you can also block it. So I think this card's incredibly powerful, and it's probably the best card in the pack. I did not design it, but I did do this masterpiece of it. So blame me if this card ruins all your Hellstart games. Next we have Norn's Porcelain Throne. For 1 white and a white for X in mana for a legendary creature. Legendary artifact vehicle. That's a 2/4 with crew 0. This is the self-driving model, which of course means that you can at any time turn it into a creature. And then it also has no more than 1 creature can be crewing Norn's Throne at a time, and creatures crewing the throne have pay 1 and for X and white, and untap, create a shard token. So this means that you can tap any creature you control on any turn, your turn or your opponent's turn, and then you can pay 1 mana and untap it and pay 2 life and create a shard token, which is of course a 2 mana enchantment, or a 0 mana enchantment where you can pay 2 and sacrifice it to scry 1 and draw a card. So this is going to be basically per turn through 1 mana or a total of 3 mana to scry 1 and draw a card every turn cycle, including your opponent's turns. And of course, it's a 2 mana 2/4. I think this card's incredibly powerful. This is a slow card advantage engine, and a 2 mana 2/4 at the same time. I think this card is going to blow you away with just how much advantage it accrues over the game while blocking and attacking. Alright, up next we have Asgore Drunk. For 2 and a white, you get a 3/3 whenever Asgore crews a vehicle, that vehicle gains Provoke until end of turn. So I think this is going to be a pretty powerful removal spell. So it's just a 3 mana 3/3, which is a good floor. And then of course, if you crew a vehicle with it, then you can remove one of your opponent's smaller creatures, oftentimes a utility creature, and I think that's going to be pretty powerful. And it's a repeatable effect, so it can be a repeatable removal spell. I think that you're going to find that this card's a lot more powerful than it reads because it has some conditions on it, but you can have vehicles in the vehicle pack, and it's going to start removing multiple creatures if your opponent doesn't get rid of it. Alright, up next we have Anime Girl who drinks gasoline and turns into a car. For 2 and a white, you get a creature vehicle girl, 3/2, with vigilance, and at the beginning of your upkeep, choose one for this woman to become, except it has this ability. A 3/2 creature with vigilance, or a 6/5 artifact creature with trample and crew 3. So unfortunately, vigilance doesn't super synergize with other vehicles in the pack, but it's still a 3 mana 3/2 with vigilance that you can use to crew your other vehicles or just attack with. You can attack with this and then crew something on blockers, but that's really the only synergy that Vigilance has in this pack. And then, of course, if you have an extra creature sitting around to crew this, then it becomes a 6/5 with Trample, which is quite powerful. So I think this card's pretty good because it has a pretty high floor and a pretty high ceiling, but it's nothing to write home about. It's not super crazily powerful. Up next, we have Theseus for 2 and a white. You get a 3/3 legendary creature human warrior with when a vehicle you control leaves the battlefield, you may sacrifice Theseus. If you do, create a token copy of that vehicle. So I'm not sure how many vehicles you're going to want to be sacrificing a 3/3 to create a token copy of, which means that this ability, I think, is pretty weak, and a 3 mana 3/3 is just okay. I think this card's just okay. When the ability comes up, I think it'll be quite powerful, and your opponent will be frustrated that they removed your best vehicle, and then you just got it back immediately, but you are giving up a 3/3 creature to do so, which, again, I'm not convinced that you want to be doing, so I think this card's pretty weak, but, I mean, it is just a 3 mana 3/3. Next, we have JPEG of a 1995 Toyota Corolla. For 3 and a white, you get a 2/2 artifact vehicle with when it enters, put target creature inside of it. And JPEG of a 1995 Toyota Corolla has all the abilities of creatures inside of it. And when it dies, return all creatures in it to the battlefield. So notably, this makes creatures go away if it leaves the battlefield without dying, but there's no real way to blink your vehicles in this pack. But if you blink it using something from another pack, I think it just makes stuff go away forever. I think you should double check with the judge, but be sure how that works. This is a 4 mana removal spell, which isn't great, except that it also comes on a 2/2 body if you manage to crew to it, and it gains all those abilities of the creature that you put inside of it. So I think this is a pretty reasonable card, and you'll be happy to cast it as a removal spell. It's a little slow, but I think you'll be happy with it. Up next, we have Wrath of O'Reilly Auto Parts, which is a sorcery for 3 white, which this sorcery sends all creatures to the auto zone and exile that they can still crew vehicles from. So this card's going to be very powerful because you'll have your vehicles off, and then you will cast Wrath of O'Reilly Auto Parts, and all the creatures will go to the auto zone, and you will tap your creatures to create your vehicles and you attack your opponent with, and your opponent will have no vehicles because vehicles are incredibly common, especially in Hellstart. So I think this card's quite powerful, even though it's 1 more mana than a Wrath of God. You're getting extra utility out of it, and this card it is definitely a card advantage, unlike some other Wraths I've talked about. So I think this card's very good. Up next, we have Gaia's Dark Hummer Limo, which is Colossus Hummer. So for 1 mana, you get an artifact equipment vehicle, 10/10, with the equipped creature gets +10/+10 and loses flying. Colossus Hummer can't gain flying and has crew quip for 8. So 8. Choose one attached to target creature you control, or this artifact becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. Crew quip only as a sorcery. This ability has power convoke. Now, just a quick reminder that this does not work with Dominic Toretto, because Dominic says he can crew creatures as if his power was infinity, and this does not have crew. It has crew quip, which is an ability with power convoke, and Dom's power is just 1. That being said, if you manage to tap a couple of creatures and turn this into a creature or attach it to a creature you control, you're going to start winning the game. And there's another synergy with it later. So I think this card is not great on its face because 8 is a lot, but the fact that it has power convoke means that you're actually only going to be spending, if you tap 2 3/3s, then you're only going to be spending, 2 mana to equip it, or even if you just dump 5 mana into it and tap a 3/3 creature, then giving a creature +10/+10 or making it a artifact creature until end of turn that's a 10/10 will be incredibly strong. So I think this card's pretty powerful. Up next, we have Brinks Truck for 3 and a white, you get a 4/4 artifact vehicle with when it enters, create a 1/1 white insect pilot creature token with this creature crew's vehicles as though its power was 2 or greater, and when it attacks, create a treasure token and crew 3. So basically, you can read this as a 4 mana 4/4 with when it attacks, create a 2 treasure token, and it leaves behind a 1/1 that can create vehicles as though its power were 2 or greater, because most of the time the insect pilot is just going to keep crewing the Brinks truck every turn, and you're just going to attack with a 4/4 that creates a treasure token every time. This is not super powerful. 4 mana for a 4/4 is about right, but it comes with a 1/1. And of course, creating a treasure token is good for stuff like that very expensive crew equip ability we saw on the previous card. So, I mean, this card isn't going to blow you away, but I think it's fine. Up next, we have the land, which is parking lot, which taps to add a white, or you can tap and uncrew a vehicle you control to add a white. So basically, you have to tap 2 permanents, tap 1 creature to crew a vehicle, and then tap the vehicle and uncrew it to add an additional white. So, I mean, that's a pretty high cost, but if you do that, this turns into a soul land, so that's pretty powerful. So this card can ramp you, and of course, it's just an unconditional white source, so I think this land's incredibly powerful, and I think you are probably going to use its ability at least once per game when you draw it. So I think this card's pretty powerful. Overall, again, because it's just an untapped white source. Alright, so a synergy to look out for here is 2025 Volvo V90 cross-country self-driving car and Gaia's Dark Hummer Limo, because you can activate the +1 on the self-driving car to turn the Hummer Limo into a 10/10 for 0 mana. So on turn 1, you cast the limo. On turn 2, you cast the self-driving car, you +1 immediately, and you're attacking with a 10/10 on turn 2. I think that's an incredibly broken synergy, and I think you will probably win a lot of games with this interaction if you manage to draw both these cards, so look out for that. Overall, I'm going to give this pack an A+. I think a lot of the cards synergize really well, and I think a lot of the cards are just individually very powerful, and I think you're going to be very excited to be drafting this pack, especially because of that 2-card combo I just mentioned, on top of each card generally being individually powerful and synergizing well together. And that's it for all of our